Yeah, I'm using that.
Mirrored it. We were about to make a little adjustment. Oh, but we got someone else joining us. You can see them. Do we want to see them? Let's not. All right. Well, thank you. This is a great event. I'm really excited to be able to come talk. Diego and I are going to talk a little bit about some language jobs. Actually, the sector of language jobs is growing the most. There's a bit of a hiatus from translation and interpretation for a minute, but I think it's worth talking about, and at least having an understanding of what one of the biggest growing markets in language jobs is, and how one might go about getting involved. I myself, I'm a professor here at the university. I'm in the Romance Language Department, and I teach classes in computational and corpus linguistics, language use and technology. My interests are in that area, and amongst other things. Diego Burgos is here. He works in the translation and interpretation, but also has that foot in the computational world. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that. So, let's see if I can talk to you about that. There you go. So the first question you might ask is, what is data analytics? You can just go to Wikipedia. It's over there. Analytics, because that's where you always start everything, right? Is the discovery and communication of meaningful patterns in data. And when we talk about data here, of course, we're talking about language data when we talk about data analytics, and it's in no short supply. We live in the most digital era, and it's continuing to go so, and the availability of data is incredible, and it exponentially grows. So a couple pieces of data from here. As you can see, the world population is of course in the billions, and number of internet users is not far behind. I mean, it's behind, but if you imagine the size of the population, there's a lot of people online. Online means, for a large part, textual. That means people are inputting lots of text, or at least viewing that. Social networks make up a really big chunk of anyone. If you're online, chances you're on a social network are really high. And of course, that means you're a player and not just a consumer. You're creating data. And then we have the whole sector of mobile devices, which is absolutely huge, right? It really comes close to everyone in the world. And if you have a mobile device, you're either communicating through telephony or even through SMS, right? The short message system, text, right? So between this kind of data, that we have an immense amount of data that's out there, right? So April 2010 estimated the number of emails sent per day to be 294 billion. Right? Some of us are more long-winded than others, but you can imagine that's a lot of information that's passing across the web and being stored places. 90% of the world's data was created within the past 2 years. So if you were to archive things, that amount of data is just increasing, really, it's exponential. And every 3 months, the world's text messages exceed the word count in every book. So we've got a data mine of huge proportions. And of course, one cannot do all of the reading of this stuff. We'd like machines to do this. The big problem here is that the data comes in what we call unstructured format. That is, humans can understand it, but machines don't, right? They don't know, don't have the life experiences that we do. So we'd like to merge those pieces of information. How do we get the text data into formats that we can use and know things about? Well, there's really 3 disciplines, general disciplines, that really build the knowledge that is being used today to harness the information that's inside of this amount of data. Of course, we're going to start with the most important, linguistics. It starts from the very basics, right? From the sound system, orthographies, to the morphology of languages, syntax, the ordering of words, that is, meaning and semantics, the other things in semantics, pragmatics. And then understanding not just languages, but how languages relate. It's a big part of the world's communication is understanding how to use the language from information from one language, and have other people from other languages understand it and use it. So there's that component. But then it's, of course, this is definitely part and parcel. We need computers to do a lot of this work. You cannot read this information. You want to extract information from this. You'd like to be able to manipulate machines to do the heavy lifting. So computer science comes involved. And this, depending on how much data you're working with, you need more than just your PC sometimes, right? You have to work with these high performance computing, which you may know or not know how to interface, but people need to know how to make that stuff work behind the scenes to be able to process the amount of data that is out there and we'd like to get access to. Programming, of course, databases, some other things. The other intersection that's very important in this area comes from statistics. So knowing what the patterns are means being able to understand what patterns are. Right? Humans are great pattern, we recognize patterns, but you can't see patterns in data that's just out of the scope. Right? We can see patterns pretty well when we can see the data, but you can't see this amount of data. Right? It's too dispersed. And statistics give us a way of being able to summarize that data and give us a chance to then interpret that data. Right? Statistics cannot interpret it, but sure can help summarize things and help us interpret it. The merging between these three areas really have jettisoned a few different outbranches. One's called natural language processing, i.e. computational linguistics, amongst other things. Another is machine learning, as getting machines to do tasks based on things that we already have taught them to do, to repeat them and apply them. Machine learning applies to more things than language, applies from all sorts of stuff to it. Today, if you were ever to go get a cancer test for something, right, the data is probably going to be analyzed by a machine who's already looked at lots of records of the types of conditions you've had and makes a pretty strong prediction whether you do or don't have cancer, right? These sorts of things could be done by humans, but we do it in such mass today that machines are facilitating it. The same principle is applied to language, right? So having understanding of what's going on in language, we use human information to then prime that into a system and make predictions about what we see and what's going on in language. Other areas are in artificial intelligence, streaming from all sorts of stuff, from the stuff that you probably remember watching in 2001 Space Odyssey, to Siri today, and all sorts of other things in between, where machines are given knowledge, or at least fed information that can become types of knowledge, primitive knowledge, to perform what otherwise could be simple tasks for humans, but in large quantities. And then finally, another area very related to all of these is called data mining, where information is actually extracted, and again, through pattern recognition and massive amount of data. So what are these skills used for? So I'm telling you about the skills that are going on. You've probably used a lot of these things and not thought much about it. Just think some genius behind a desk some places put this stuff together. How cool is that? Like this, maybe this genius, right? Dictation software is one, right? So have you ever thought how you can talk to a machine now? So if you have iPhones and iPads and Androids, you say something and it will dictate for you. If you've played with dictation software in the past, it was not so good. Today, things are much, much better. But it takes a lot of information, it takes a lot of pattern recognition, it takes a lot of knowledge from linguistics to be able to understand what the right kinds of patterning is, what are the relevant units to feed machines. They can't figure this out without us, and we need to provide the right kind of information. Who does that? People who know about language. Text-to-speech. This particular technology is very helpful for people who have difficulties or certain types of restrictions when working with mobile devices. So if you are hard of sight, you need things to read to you. So text screen readers facilitate the lives of many, many people to be involved with this amount of data that we're talking about on the web, right? That would otherwise be inaccessible. Spell and grammar checking, you all use this. You write papers and it corrects it and sometimes doesn't correct it, but it's a pretty daunting task to understand how to find and to correct patterns in language. Information extraction, this is where you can take a body of unstructured text and train machines or computers to understand what are the relevant pieces of information, such that as I take on new information, I can start to build what's called an ontology, an understanding of the way the world is. So this is a couple slices of text. If this was a piece of text, the second sign of zodiac is Taurus. Well, then it gets thrown into some set thing called zodiac, right? It understands the zodiac must be something, and then starts to attach, by given understanding of where the language is, an understanding of the world. How many of you saw IBM's Watson on Jeopardy a couple of years ago? All right, so this is major question answering feat, all based on the backs of information extraction. Watson he outperformed the other two champions on Jeopardy. And if you remember right, the object there is to respond fast. It's not just get it correct, but fast. So technology's come a long way. That's one of the most, the strongest cases for question answering. But lots of other companies are very interested in this for different reasons, right? To be able to understand things and summarize things, which is one of the next points. Machine translation, which you may have already tried to use. We're not going to talk about machine. We talked. Our guest, the speaker, was talking about machine translation, particularly Google Translate. There are strengths and weaknesses to this. But the interesting part about this is that machine translation is not built by machines. It's actually built on the backs of translators. The translations that people have performed, particularly for sources that are easy to grab, like the UN, are fed to machines, and machines find patterns between the documents that are parallel and pull from those documents statistical regularities that then can give you really good translations, if and only if you have the right pairings of documents. So don't expect to find pairs between English and Macedonian and talk about maybe ordering food, because how many documents in the archives from Google have already been parallel translated for that register? So it's both understanding the strengths and weaknesses of that translation. For those who are interested in translation, can understand why Google Translate helps and where it can't help so much. Text summarization is another application. This is particularly useful for things like movie reviews. So a lot of ratings are automatically generated based on actual movie reviews by real critics. So critics are particularly interesting cases because they often don't just say, "I really like this." It's a much more complex, nuanced description of what the film is about. Accordingly, we read these things and understand they liked it or they didn't to some degree. The trick is getting the machine to get that information, summarize it, and to some degree even give it a certain rating from 1 to 10 and create those little stars you see from something, right? They come from something, sometimes from us as users adding those things, and sometimes from critics' responses themselves. Another application is something called sentiment analysis, which is a big, also known as opinion mining. This is a particularly interesting application used in Chicago. It's called Foodborne Chicago, which actually monitors tweets by geographic location. Tweets often include information about where they're tweeted from in the world. In the Chicago area, all tweets are passed through a machine learning algorithm, and then look for keywords that suggest that somebody might be sick and it might come from having eaten something. And when they do, it sends a tweet back to them in a reply and says, "If you're sick, please report it," as a way to inspire people to document the cases of foodborne illnesses and get to the root of who's causing people to be sick in their town. All right? It's an interesting way of using technology to be able to understand sentiment in a much more involved type of understanding, as meaning is much more complicated than some of these other tasks. And finally, there's a whole buzz about, it's called market prediction, in which case people are taking lots of sources from the web, from blogs to Twitter to all sorts of things, and aggregating this information around ideas such as products. So if you imagine you're sitting in a company and you'd like to know how your product's doing, you've just done a new ad campaign and you're launching this out there. You'd like to see if the buzz on Twitter is helping, right? If it's negative or positive, or you see if the blogs are writing a lot about it, or if it's a total dud. And that's a kind of information and kind of marketing that you can't get, right, by calling people and getting targeted surveys, right? You're getting a lot of perspective. And you can't do this by yourself. They don't have a bunch of monkeys watching Twitter and just responding to things, right? It takes a lot of manpower, which is not being used here, right? This is all going back to this area of natural language processing, data analytics, etc. So who's hiring? A lot of people. Some of these places you may know their names, others you may not, and they deal with all sorts of things. Of course, you know Google does it all, right? From A to Z, their heads and everything, and so are Microsoft's and Apple's. From companies like Nuance, who deal with speech technologies, Transperfect, Kedan, MT, machine translation, Systran, etc., etc. There's lots and lots of interest all across. All sorts of companies are interested in this information because there's so much of it and it's so valuable to them. So, if you're looking to get a job in this area, or if you're already in this area and you're looking to get a job, say you've gone through this area, you want to get a job, you're in a better position than a lot of other positions. So this is actually a little graph of what's you see a listing here from a really important site for linguists to get job, which is called the Linguist List. The Linguist List posts all sorts of things that have to do with language-related stuff. And what's interesting is if you aggregate over the last 4 years, from 2010 to 2013, you see that bar in red is actually for computational and computationally related job positions. The blue bar here only by applied linguistics, which is sort of an aggregate of a lot of things. But you can see that it's hugely important. Now, this is important to remember that in the 2010 area, this is whenever we were in a pretty bad crisis for jobs, so nobody was getting jobs for anything. So things are partly a function of rebounding since then, but you can see that the computational jobs have been in at least the last 4 years here, and continue to look as one of the more available jobs and most sought out after jobs in all sorts of different positions and all sorts of different types. At this point, I'd like to pass it over to Diego, who's going to give us a little bit more insight of the kinds of skills, kinds of positions, and things that people are looking at in this area. Are you ready?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I skipped one slide. I thought we were switching earlier. Oh, I just wanted to mention a couple things. He'll set up. Sorry about this. What can we do for you, right? So I'm going to go back to the slide we had before, these things. Well, we do some of this stuff here. That's the important plug, right? Great. Where does one do this, get this information? Well, we do linguistics. We do the intro class, which covers a lot of the formal stuff. Come back to me. We have a language engineering localization terminology class, which Professor Burgos teaches. We also do Spanish translation, so the translation between the linguistics knowledge, very crucial for what you're working with here. And my course in Linguistics 380, Language Use and Technology, those of you who have taken this class know what I'm talking about. Parallel computation in the computer science department, database management systems. There's courses in artificial intelligence, mathematics, you want to take statistics. Some understanding of probability and statistics are really crucial. So that's what I wanted to cover. We have it. And I also wanted to mention briefly, as I pass this over to Diego, is that a really interesting prospect is working with our interdisciplinary program. So on campus, there's an interesting sort of interdisciplinary major, which one can actually pick and choose. So if you're undergraduate working here, thinking about putting together a major of your own, working with different departments in different, you think it's a combination of at least 2 or maximum 2 departments, you can pull together a lot of these things instead of just trying to shoot down linguistics or just mathematics or just computer science. So keep that in mind, or pass it on to those who would be interested. Ready? I guess we forgot to explain why we're doing all this stuff. We actually have some colleagues and friends joining us from around the world on WebEx, so that we're not just playing around with weird technology to make it confusing.
Thank you. We have some other people invited basically from Colombia and Spain, and so this room would be much more crowded if they were not that far. But thank you to all of them also for being here, and thank you all too, and thank you to Professor Jerid Francom for such a very good introduction to the problem, to the topic. And what I'm going to do here is basically to give you a little bit more detailed insight on what's going on in terms of these jobs and the relations and connections among the different disciplines connected to linguistics and also to other disciplines. So maybe you're already familiar with this because this is the screen not the same screen because we took it independently, but it was also taken from the linguist list, and this is the source for the data I'm going to show you right now, and this is the source for my discussion. There should be around a bunch of other resources for you to look for jobs, but this is a very good one, and that's why we're using this. The linguist list is a list that is active from the 1990s, and it's currently run by the Eastern Michigan University. It's a very good resource for you. And I'm just going to show you data just from the 2004 till 2014, and this is basically what's going on. We had 669 offers in 2004, then almost 500 in 2009, and then we're seeing an increase in the openings in the last 2 years. And of course, in 2014 we have just 113, but that's because we are in March. We're for sure going to have much more this year. And what I'm going to show you in this slide, the next slides, it's basically what you know, or what's known as word clouds. And this is a product of data mining. Talking about data mining, what we did here was to take the list of jobs offered by the linguist list, and we analyzed them, analyzed this data, and we try to see this in a different way, because you can see this in a frequency graphic, let's say, with bars or things like that. This is a pretty more graphic way to observe what's going on here. So the words or the expressions you're seeing here are those with a higher frequency. And I have everything here. I have countries, I have languages, I also have positions, and I have disciplines here. But I'm going to try to help you see what's going on here in this slide. So this is from 2004, and what we can see here in this first year that most of the jobs offered are education oriented. So we have a lot of assistant professor, associate professor, lecturer, instructor, and that was basically landscapes in the first years. But we also had some private sector taking part here, and that's why we see this INC here from Incorporated, and we don't have still proper names there, but that's the first signal that we had at that time, the companies just starting to show up in this general landscape. And we also had some specific roles in those openings. For example, we have here a translator, but we are going to see a bunch of others in the next slides. And of course, countries. And this is going to be a constant. So the country which offers most of the jobs is the USA, but we are going to see the United Kingdom and Germany are also countries where you can find a good deal of opportunities abroad. And the disciplines. Computational linguistics is a discipline that was born many years ago, maybe around the 50s. And that's why even so early we can see that there are jobs offered at least in this resource. This is for 2009, so I'm jumping from 2004 to 2009. The landscape here changes a little bit. So here we still have here the private sector, but we can see that this the set of openings here is not so educational oriented. So we can start seeing a balance here. So the frequency assistant professor is not as high as before. In some disciplines become stronger here, like applied linguistics. And it's good to know that applied linguistics is understood not as language acquisition, not only as language acquisition, but also as applying language models to solve language problems. And you can see that in automatic summarization, machine learning, and a lot of different applications of language. This is for 2012, and so it looks like it's a little bit more. There's a little more balance here for private sector and education or teaching-oriented jobs. Okay, but we can see here some proper names for some companies. We have Appen, Butler, Hill. Or we also have a Nuance Communication, which is one of the companies Jerid mentioned in his presentation. And some disciplines also started to become stronger, like phonetics. And we're going to see in a while that phonetics is a very strong discipline if we want to look at the working for big companies such as Google, Nuance companies, for example, or even for the educational sector. This is from 2013. And so there's a private sector again, that's Google. Google started offering these positions 2 or 3 years ago. It seems like before they were mainly relying on computer scientists, but now they are offering these jobs for that mix of computational linguistics and linguistics too. And some disciplines keep strong, that they are constant, like translation, for example. And some disciplines become stronger, text and corpus linguistics, because of that amount of data we're dealing with nowadays. So this is a discipline that every time becomes more and more stronger in order to be able to manage such huge amounts of data. And this is the landscape for 2014. In the trendscape in this year, same languages keep strong, like German, like Spanish, of course, English, but there are some other languages like Arabic that arise and that are of interest for new jobs in language-related profiles. And this is the whole landscape from 2004 to 2014, and basically the trends are the same. Because nowadays we have more data, we have more jobs offered, and that's why we are not going to see any changes. We take the whole amount of job openings here. Okay, so just to have, that was just to have an idea of how this landscape behaves from 2004 to nowadays. But then I think all of us have had that sensation that when we are leaving college or when we are leaving our graduate studies, we don't know what to do exactly because we have so many options, so many opportunities. That looks pretty like a universe, like a galaxy. You know? Maybe you have seen an image before with an arrow here, and you say you're right here. Yeah? So you feel like you're lost in this huge universe. And when I for the first time analyzed the data from the linguist list, so I got almost the same shape of a galaxy here, and that's why it made me thought that maybe it would be a good idea to show you this. But of course, you are not supposed to know what it is or to understand or to be able to read this because we are going to talk about it a little bit more in detail in a while. But what we are seeing here basically are the interactions and relations of 2012 and 2014 job openings. We are going to start focusing on this cluster in the very center of the graphic. And this is what we can see right now. Even if it's too difficult, and that's like that's exactly what you feel when you don't know what to do, where to go. I mean, what can I do here? But at least you can start identifying some clusters here. And these clusters are those areas which offer maybe most of the jobs, and maybe something of interest to you is right there. And if we go a little bit closer, we are going to see something like this. And the interesting thing of this graphic is that we can see all the interactions and interrelations right here. So we can see arrows and lines going everywhere, and that's because every discipline in linguistics is interrelated. So if you're working on phonetics, you can be sure that if you tune up your profile a little bit more, you can also think about morphology, or you can also think about syntax. Or that if the job open is profiled for a certain specialist, maybe you can work 6 months or 1 year and try to get the competencies you need in order to fit to that position. Because everything is connected right there. But if we go and take a look, well, maybe you won't be able to read this, but this is for computational linguistics, and this is all the options you have for computational linguistics. So you don't have to effort yourself to try to read this, but I'm going to try to describe it a little bit. So for computational linguistics, what we have are like offers for the educational sector and offers for the private sector. So companies and colleges and universities there. That's what you can find here in computational linguistics. You have, for example, programmer, but you also have senior research scientist, natural language processing software engineer, researcher, but you also have assistant professor over here. So you have a lot of different options here if you decide to go working on this line. And same thing for natural language processing. They are basically very related, but of course there are some differences that we are not going to go over right now. And this is for phonology, and take a look at this bunch of opportunities you have there. Maybe we never think about it, but we are going to see in a while that we can find a number of very interesting jobs. So we have here instructor, for example. You want to keep working on the educational side, but you also have underneath you have voice developer. So it means that there are some private companies that want people working on phonology or phonetics in order to help them develop certain applications for speech synthesis, speech recognition, for example. You know that the famous scientist Stephen Hawking, he uses one of those devices, and that was designed in California. Basically, uses speech synthesis. When you type, and then you can hear what you're typing, and that basically has a very strong component of phonetics and phonology. Then text corpus linguistics, we have also a very good deal of opportunities for that, and for translation, of course. For translation, we also have the same options. We have educational side, and we also have the private side or the company side. For general linguistics, for example, we are going to find mainly jobs on the educational side. Yeah? So that's also something that we can see from this analysis. And these are postdocs. So if you're thinking about going further in your studies, you're thinking about doing your PhD, this is what you have for postdocs. And you have a lot of opportunities, not only in the universities, but also in certain companies that are looking for people doing research projects in their companies. This is for assistant professors, and this is for language acquisition, social linguistics, psycholinguistics, syntax. We go a little bit lower in the concept tree of linguistics, and those are basically those to have a visual idea of what's going on with some of the disciplines in linguistic related areas. And so the question here is: are these companies looking for? This is basically for companies, not for universities or colleges. This is basically for companies. So the question is: are they looking for exclusive profiles? And according to this analysis, to this graphic, it looks like if it were like that, you know, that they are isolated, and they look like they are not worried about competences and don't worry about competing for professionals. That's what it looks like right here, like independent bodies right here. But that's not that true. Because take a look at this. Take a look at this other analysis. This is difficult to read, but mainly focus on this area right here. So what we got here, this is Google. This is Google. This is LeapForce. Then we have interactive intelligence right here, and then we have Nuance, and we have Appen Butler Hill here. So we have 4 companies here, and we have Google right here. And what you can see here in this area are those disciplines that are in the intersection of the interests of these companies. So basically, what they're doing is that they're waiting for you and they're fighting for you. So if you have this profile, let's go and take a closer look to this area here. So if you're working in phonetics, for example, you're going to have Appen, you're going to have Google fighting for you because they want you. And that's what this graphic shows. Or if you work with morphology, or take a look, for example, at computational linguistics, or German. Let's suppose you have German and you have text and corpus linguistics, and those are 2 of your those differentiating features of your profile. So you're going to be wanted by LeapForce and by Google. And so that's what basically what this shows, and that you have a lot of opportunities there, and so you can try to identify those sources or those potential employers who would be interested in your profile, and try to make the most of that. Okay. These are the top 10 global industries for language services in 2013, mainly for translation, but of course there are going to be a lot of different professionals involved in different processes here. So in the first place, we have professional, scientific, and technical activities, including legal, accounting, management, consulting, and advertising. In second place, we have healthcare and social work activities, then financial insurance, then manufacturing, machinery and equipment, then manufacturing, computer, electronic, optical products. Then we have software and publishing, manufacturing, motor vehicles, trailers, semi-trailers, other transport equipment, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, and public administration, defense, justice, social services, and then finally telecommunications. So these are the top 10 industries looking for language services in 2013. Then finally, how to start out. First of all, follow Monica Weber's advice. Yeah, so that would be the first step, and then subscribe to relevant lists like the Linguist list. So you'll receive every day news about what jobs are being open every single day, and then browse relevant resources. And one of the resources is the Multilingual magazine. That's the 2012, but this is the 2014. And what you're going to have here is a lot of different companies with their email addresses and their websites, so you can just go there and submit your CV. So just try to find if there is something here interesting for you. Identify appeal and openings, and tune up your CV, whether be it for in-house or as a freelance. But that's the most important thing, is that you identify what's the profile you're looking for, try to strengthen your profile, and tune up your CV so you can present yourself as a strong candidate. And make the most of your first chance. So let's suppose that you're working as a translator and you have your first assignment as a translator. Maybe that's a translator